Which is the most emotional of the 16 personalities? Some types talk about their emotions a lot, while other types might be feeling stuff intensely, but not expressing it much. What this really comes down to, and what I'm going to explore in this video, is the difference between introverted feeling and extroverted feeling, which are the two feeling cognitive functions. The FP and TJ types all have introverted feeling, and the FJ and TP types have extroverted feeling. And if you're new to typology, you're just getting started on this wacky journey, I suggest you take a look at my video explaining what the cognitive functions actually are. The card is right here. Oh, sorry, Robert, I bumped into you there. This discussion of introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling will also shed some light on some common typology questions, because I know a lot of people are like, what's the difference between INFJ and INFP? That question alone will be worth watching this video, because while both of those types are feelers, they deal with emotions in very different ways. Do you wear clothing on your torso? If you do, and you want to support your boy, Professor Frank James, on the YouTubes, grab yourself a Stay Cool and Attractive tee or hoodie. Stay cool and attractive is what I've been saying at the end of every video just about since 2018. This is the classic Stay Cool and Attractive design, but if you want something a little more discreet, you can get this design with just a little logo on the pocket. So go to infj.me/store, get yourself a shirt, and I feel a little awkward now that my vanity link is INFJ because it seems like I'm playing favorites, but I'm not. Okay, FI, introverted feeling, versus FE, extroverted feeling, and the emotional differences between them. So in general, when we're talking about introverted versus extroverted functions, there are a few differences that apply to all of them, no matter what we're talking about. It doesn't matter if it's feeling, thinking, whatever. The first most basic thing is that introverted functions are primarily pointed inwards and extroverted functions are primarily pointed outwards. That one is pretty self-explanatory. To a degree, everyone is aware of their feelings and other people's feelings, but an introverted feeler is going to be much more primarily focused on what they feel. That's what comes first. But an extroverted feeler is going to be much more primarily concerned with what others feel. That comes first. Another big division between introverted and extroverted functions is that introverted functions tend to be very deep but very narrow. All right, there we go. You know how when a teacher writes it on the board, you're like, oh, I better write it in my notes. Whereas extroverts tend to be broad but shallow. And when I say shallow, it doesn't mean like, you know, fake or a negative connotation of shallow. It just means it's doing a lot of work over a lot of ground, but not going very deeply into it. Whereas the introverted functions, they pick one little thing to go into and they go very deeply. Now, already, some people are going to start to bristle at this description because I'm sure there are very many extroverted feelers watching. You know, if you're an INFJ or something and you're like, dude, I feel things very deeply, very intensely. And yeah, that's true. Everyone can have deep emotions, but ultimately, if we're comparing extroverted feelers to introverted feelers, FE types are not feeling as deeply to the point where they get stuck on their emotions the way that the FI types do. See, with any introverted function, people can get stuck in it because they're so deep in it. They are getting tunnel vision in a sense. The introverted feelers are really just focused on what they are feeling. Let me mine down, like Minecraft, because Minecraft invented mining. Let me mine down into my feeling state right now. And sometimes that means I feel happy, sometimes I feel sad, sometimes that means I think this thing is cool or I think this thing is fun, I'm having fun pursuing it. But either way, it's narrow and focused in, and it's like they have blinders on. They're only paying attention to what they feel. I think I've said that 4 times already. Whereas the extroverted feelers, they are very focused on the spectrum of feelings, whether that be other people's feelings or how their feelings fit into the spectrum. They always want to know what other people feel because in many ways extroverted feelers want to know if what they feel is the right way to feel. Is this the appropriate emotional reaction to have to whatever it is based on how other people might react to it? An introverted feeler feeler is gonna think that that is totally foreign. They would be like, why would you care if what you feel is appropriate or not? It's just what you feel. It's not anyone else's business. This is getting to one of the core differences between introverted feelers and extroverted feelers. For the introverted feelers, the feeling and emotional elements are very personal. They're private. These are my emotions. This is how I value stuff. This is what I have chosen to prioritize. I don't care if this emotional response is not appropriate because I own my own feelings. And I just want to bathe and marinate myself in these feelings. Everyone else can go fudge off. Pardon my language. Now, everyone to a degree has a personal connection to their emotions because they're your emotions. But extroverted feelers are like, okay, yeah, I feel these feelings, but I kind of need to get my act together if I'm having an inappropriate emotional response. It's like, I am aware if what I am feeling is weird on the spectrum. The emotions are not as personal. You see how I don't put not personal, just like making it a binary, personal, not personal. It's still on a spectrum. So very personal, less personal. So as I mentioned before, the other big difference is that the FI types are more private with their emotions. So even if an INFP is feeling very emotional, you might not know. They're very private about it. They're not necessarily going to feel the need to share it with you. Now, they can share it. They feel confident if they are talking about their emotions. They're not going to be like, oh, emotions, oh, that feels weird. No, emotions are their jam, if you will. They especially feel confident making their decisions based off how they feel. They're just not as comfortable just constantly communicating their feelings to you because they have to process them. They are private to them. So when they do talk about how they feel, it's after a lot of processing. I've figured out what I feel, or at least I've begun to figure it out, and now I can explain it to you in a more deliberate, controlled way. When an introverted feeler tells you how they're feeling, it's just the tip of the iceberg. They've gone through it very deeply and they don't want to show you all of the skeletons in the closet. They don't want to show you the depth of maybe even the hell that they went through. They'll just show you a little bit of it, and it'll be mostly processed already. Now, of course, I just want to point out that I'm talking about the types that prefer FI, because you get the TJ types, for example, who prefer TE. They're not comfortable with the emotions on that level. So I'm talking about an INFP or something. The thing about their processing, the FI types processing, is it takes a long time. I feel like the extroverted feelers can process their emotions pretty quickly. They're just like, I feel this, okay, boom, done, let's move on. But introverted feelers need to work it all out very thoroughly. Of course, there are exceptions where an extroverted feeler gets really stuck on something, especially if something major happens in their life. They have some kind of breakdown, something traumatic happens. It might take them a while in therapy to work it out. But if we're just talking about our day-to-day range of emotions, they're just like, feel one thing, process it, move on, we're good. It's like the FI types get emotionally attached to their emotions. So once they feel a certain way, they don't want to drop it. Extroverted feeling is different, and this is where typology nerds get tripped up on the internet. For some reason, I read this a lot. You'll read online that the extroverted feelers don't even have their own emotions. And so the only types that talk about their emotions are the FI types. And a lot of people have this so bass-ackwards that it blows my mind. And I thought they were right for years, and it really confused me. But now I realize, no, the extroverted feelers, the types that prefer extroverted feeling, talk about their emotions the mostest. They're processing their emotions aloud as well as asking you how you feel. They want to go through the depths of their hell with you and vice versa. They want to go through your emotional processing with you because they want the ping back from you. Their feeling is extroverted. They need to get their emotions out there so that other people around them can be like, oh yeah, I feel that too, or I felt that once, and your feeling response is appropriate. Don't worry about it. Or people might be like, hey man, your emotions are maybe a little out there. Maybe you should be feeling this other way. Then the extroverted feeler is like, oh, maybe my emotion is not the correct one to have, which is interesting because that extroverted feeling process with the conclusion of, is my emotion right or not? That's like a TI introverted thinking conclusion. So the extroverted feelers have introverted thinking as well. And introverted thinking is really where their internal processing is, and that's the thinking is what's personal to them. And I feel like the TI is a lot more of what the extroverted feelers identify with. Even a bubbly ESFJ who's always, trying to make other people happy and always talking about emotions and stuff, their inner world is introverted thinking. They're not going to talk to you about it, but that's what's going on up here. So you'll hear the extroverted feelers analyze their own emotions in a way that's like, oh yeah, that emotion was wrong. That was the TI incorrect emotion to have, and now I need to recalibrate a bit. If you're an FI type, what I just said is gonna sound totally freaking bizarre to you, like the most weird thing you ever heard. You're gonna just be like, nah. My inner feelings are my inner world. I'm not changing my emotions because they're wrong, because that doesn't even make sense. How can you have a wrong emotion, man? So yes, you hear the extroverted feelers talk about emotion more. If you hear someone who seems to be going overboard with their emotion and maybe oversharing, especially if they're looking for you to process with them and give your emotional reaction as well, they're probably an extroverted feeler. Because to the types who prefer extroverted feeling, it's not as embarrassing to bring all their emotional baggage out there because, that's what we all are supposed to be doing, right? Because from their perspective, our emotions aren't connected to who we are. So, what is the most emotional personality type? Well, let's start with the least emotional types. Let's start with the thinking types because we might intuitively think to ourselves, these are the least emotional types. In some regard, that is correct, but thinking types do have emotion and they do come out, sometimes in a very fiery way. So the least emotional types are gonna be the ISTP and INTP. No surprises here. Because they have extroverted feeling as their inferior function, and so it's this double kind of thing of FE is the inferior function, so they suppress it, and it's extroverted, so it's not a part of their inner world. Their inner world is completely taken up by introverted thinking and then either introverted intuition or introverted sensing. After that, you gotta go with the other inferior feelers, which would be ESTJ and ENTJ. These types are gonna be a little bit more aware of their feeling because it's introverted, so it's part of their inner world. They don't want to pay attention to it, but they can't help but realize it is there. You'll actually get quite a few of these types who think they're feeling types because they do feel things so deeply, but they're always sacrificing that to the extroverted thinking. They're like, whatever, the feelings, we can worry about that later. Their FI is like a steam valve where it just builds up for a long time and then explodes. They can react in kind of a childish way when negative or even positive emotions build up. Next you would have ENTP and ESTP. Both of these types have extroverted feeling as their third function, and you can see them use it a decent amount actually, in large part because it is extroverted. They often have this charm that comes out because extroverted feeling is concerned with stuff like how do I appear charming, how do I play the social game, how do I impress others, but they're not really going to be processing a ton of their emotions a lot. They will probably save that for like a couple times a year when they have some kind of crisis, and then they're just like, man, I just need to talk out how I feel right now. Then you have INTJ and ISTJ who have introverted feeling as their third function. Even though these types get stereotyped as some of the least emotional, they have their emotions right there under the surface, but they're not telling you about it. So with these extroverted thinkers right here and right here, that's the thing. Introverted feeling is very strong and very under the surface, and even when a person prefers introverted feeling, they're not going to share it much. So when you get someone who doesn't prefer it, who's a thinker, forget about it. You'll never hear really much emotional talk at all from these types. If you were to sit an INTJ down in a therapist chair, after a while, they might surprise you with how much emotion comes out. Okay, so now let's move over to the feeling types. Let's talk about ENFP and ESFP. They have introverted feeling as their second function, and these types are pretty emotional. But it is their second function, so it's fairly balanced with their thinking. So these types have FI as their second function, and then their third function is TE, extroverted thinking. Your two middle functions, your second and your third, are pretty balanced. So they can go back and forth pretty easily between what they feel and what everyone else thinks. And my head was blocking that. While ultimately they feel confident talking about how they feel and connecting on an emotional level, it's this double thing, like I said before, where introverted feeling isn't going to be the most expressive. They're going to keep a lot of things to themselves, even though they're making their decisions primarily with their feeling, they're hiding it from you. I think next on the list we would have the ISFJ and INFJ, but we will leave that later since it helps my average view duration. So next we'll talk about the ESFJ and the ENFJ. These types have extroverted feeling, FE, as their dominant function. So they're actually going to appear to be the most emotional because they always wear their emotions on their sleeve. Their thinking and feeling functions are way out of balance, so they rely way more on their FE than the IJs do, who we will talk about later. These types here, the ESFJ and ENFJ, are always talking about emotion. They always want you to know how they feel, they always want to know how you feel. And then they want to know how you feel about how they feel and how they feel about how you feel, so on and so forth. It's a vicious cycle. You know, the thing with extroverted feelers that might surprise you is that their emotions are more volatile, and it's because they're not as deep, so they move around easier. They don't stay in any emotional place too long. They're fine moving on to something else, or at least returning to a baseline neutral. This is especially true if they realize, oh hey, my emotions were kind of extreme on the spectrum. Oh, I went to the extreme, now let me pull it back a little bit. Whereas the FI types, they'll be like, I went to an extreme and I stayed there. Now in some ways I feel like these types, I mean all the types that prefer FE here in the middle, might be a little bit awkward about talking about emotion. Not that they are themselves awkward about it, but they will make you feel awkward. They are confident talking about their emotions to the point where it makes you feel weird because they are dragging you through their emotional journey. Now the introverted feelers, the FP types, will make you feel awkward in a different way because they will just talk about emotion, especially you see it when they talk about what they value. They will talk about it in a way where it shows no regard for anyone else's feelings. They'll just be like, I feel this way, and don't care about any pingback, don't care about what other people think, and it just is like really awkward. So it's like different awkwardnesses. FE awkward, I really need to engage with you emotionally and I need you to respond to my emotions and here's everything I'm feeling. Or FI, rather, awkward, where it's like, here's what I feel, don't care what you think or feel. So yeah, the introverted feelers really don't do that whole ping back thing. Because introverted feelers, and I'll just put the rest of them on the board here, we have INFP and ISFP, who we'll talk about a little later. So these types are the FI types, and these types are the FE types. Introverted feelers don't want to change their emotional state to affect someone else's state unless it's like something very controlled, like they're an actor in a play. And I feel like even then, for an introverted feeler, it's still more about them and their emotion. All right, so now let's talk about the ISFJ and INFJ. They do the same thing with extroverted feeling that the EJ, the ESFJ and ENFJ do, but they are much more imbalanced, like the EPs up here. They're more imbalanced, so they have FE, which they prefer, but then in their inner world, as their third function, they have TI. So, like I said, your middle functions are balanced. They're a little less volatile, I think, than the ESFJ and ENFJ, because that thinking is anchoring the feeling and keeping it more in check. The ISFJ and INFJ know how to use feeling. They can be demonstrative with their feeling. They'll always be aware of how you feel, and they will talk about their feelings as well. So, on the surface, ISFJs and INFJs they appear fairly emotional, but it's not something that they have processed a ton before they start talking about it. Then you have the INFPs and ISFPs. They are dominant introverted feelers. They're always on autopilot in introverted feeling what they feel. They feel it extremely deeply and extremely narrowly. They're not looking out at anyone else and what they're feeling. I mean, yes, of course, the FI types will recognize, oh, someone else is sad, and maybe even have a reaction like, now I feel sad for them, but that's not like the primary concern. And a lot of times the IP types, even the INFP and ISFP, will just like miss what other people are feeling. They just like weren't paying attention. It's because their inferior function is extroverted thinking. So they're barely paying attention to anyone else at all. They don't care how you feel about what they feel. They're not going to change what they feel for you. But the thing is, they might not ever tell you about it. So they're feeling things very deeply, they're not mentioning it. And that's what trips people up. INFPs and ISFPs are not processing their emotions aloud with you nonstop. Occasionally they'll be like, hey, I need to work something out. Here's how I'm feeling. But it's in a much different way than an extroverted feeler who's just like, bleh, emotions, bleh. I mean, they're not, all right, so the extroverted feelers will not always just vomit their emotions on you because they're also very aware of what is appropriate and what is polite and how will you feel if I vomit this on you. But they'll still share a lot more freely. The INFP and ISFP, all the introverted feelers, they have taken the responsibility to process their emotions. They've worked it out for themselves. These types might really be coming to you when they need some extroverted thinking help on like, what do I actually do about this feeling? And it's tough for the introverted feelers because they get stuck on their own emotions. And this is why you get the stereotype of INFPs being depressed, because if they get depressed, you can't pull them out of it. They have to figure out how to get out of it on their own. And that's tough for them. They take it very hard. They sometimes don't see a way out. It's hard for them to accept a helping hand, because ultimately a helping hand is extroverted thinking. So who's the most emotional? I'd have to say it's the INFP and ISFP. Dominant introverted feeling, it's tough. But remember, they're not going to be showing it to you all the time. The types that show it the most, though, are the extroverted feelers, specifically the ESFJ and ENFJ. You know, and this all makes me wonder, what is the smartest personality type? Well, I've already made a video about that. Watch it here. And until I messed up my catchphrase. Until next time, stay cool and attractive.